Oh, on my end, it says streaming live.
Oh, we are live. Fantastic. So, welcome. This is another installment of our mental health series. This is going to be number 11 in the series. And today I'm so honored to speak with my friend, Maggie. And Maggie is going to address this from a different perspective. We've spoken from, we've come at mental health from all different points of view over the last couple weeks. And again, this being number 11 in the series, we're addressing this from a totally different perspective. Maggie is an executive functioning coach, but she's got an incredible background. So I'm going to just stop talking and let Maggie introduce herself and share a little bit about her background. And then we're going to just jump right into some of the mental health questions. So welcome, Maggie.
Hello, hi. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very jealous. Your background makes me very, very jealous because it's not it's not a Zoom background, it's the real deal. And to kind of jump in about who I am and what my background looks like. I was born and raised in Chicago, which is where I find myself sheltering in place right now, which as a world schooler, as an adventurer, is really hard. And it's something we're going to talk about a little bit. But before we get there, what's my background? I grew up in Chicago and then went off to university in Montreal at McGill, where I earned a degree, a Bachelor of Arts, in something called Humanistic Studies, which was a fancy way of saying I couldn't decide what I wanted to study. And I saw all kinds of different paths and connections among different areas. And I knew that what really sparked my interest were connections among people. I already saw that. I really was interested in this idea of micro meets macro, whether that was political, whether that was social, whether that was environmental, and kind of connecting those dots. And then I had a minor in Latin American history, which won't surprise you, Lainey. I'm like obsessed with Latin America and love Latin America. And when I graduated after working in at the Chicago Humanities Festival, I mean, what are you going to do with a humanistic studies degree? And we had a festival that was called Home and Away, the festival that I was working at, which felt so perfect. And we had travel writers that came to see us. And I went, that I would rather be doing this than working in an office space. The ideas are cool, but the lifestyle that they're doing is really cool. So fast forward, I ended up traveling in Latin America and then went back to get my master's at the United Nations University for Peace. It's a real place, I'm not making it up. And the UN decided to put their graduate program in Costa Rica because it's the first country to have abolished its standing army. Which is very, very cool. Costa Rica continues to have no army to this day. And at UPeace, as we called it, I received a master's in media, peace, and conflict studies. And it's fascinating to see how it involves my work right now. And also, as we're starting to consume media and connect through media, I find that master's degree becomes even more relevant, right? With the spin of conflict, right? Which is something that I want to talk about also, of what we consume and the messages we do take in makes a difference, right? And one of the strategies I look at with students for executive functioning is this idea of, healthy messaging and healthy reception, right? What are we feeding, kind of like a garden? But we'll get there in a minute to kind of wrap up the bow of then where I am now. I engage with my own family. I have 7-year-old twins in world schooling, and my twins were born in Buenos Aires in Argentina, where I lived for many years, and where I met my husband, and where I started working in education and have worked in education for about 15 years. And when we decided to move back to the United States around 5 years ago, I started on the path of executive functioning. And I had never heard of executive functioning. I didn't know what executive functioning was. And I just started working with young people who, again, I'd been working with a classroom teacher for many years. And I said, something's going on here about the overscheduling and the scatteredness of the people that I'm engaging with, right? There's something going on here. Can't quite put my finger on it. But what I've been hired to do is to talk about content and mastery of material and what we need to be looking at as approach and breaking this down, not only so that it's cut up into bite-sized pieces, but also so that there's engagement and excitement. And so with my yoga degree, to kind of put in one more thing, because I do teach yoga and meditation, when I started to see students who weren't able to execute on tasks, they weren't able to sit down and get started on the homework or engage in the project or whatever it was they were looking at, we would start to use strategies from yoga, from tools, talking about getting into a place that they were regulated and ready to learn. So it's a long explanation of my background, but there it is.
Well, it's wonderful, and I've heard you present several times, and in fact, you're part of the Virtual World Schooling Summit, and I think it's so important to address executive functioning in times of, oh, you know, normalcy, right? But now we're in a heightened stress. We're in a time of uncertainty, and why is addressing executive functioning important now?
Yeah. So maybe first we can start by defining what executive functioning is, because I think a lot of people do know, and a lot of folks like me 5, 6 years ago, when, what's this? What is this all about? And there's still to this day, people hear it. It's a big buzzword in educational circles, but there's different definitions of what it means. So to just break down what executive functioning is and then its relevance for today. And I sort of laughed when you said in normal times. I went, we're not in normal times right now, right? It's true. What is normal time? My definition of executive functioning is the ability to pause and plan. Right? So I'm going to repeat that. It's the ability to pause and plan. When we think about what executive functioning is and what happens, its relationship in the brain, we can think of it as the brain CEO, right? We can also think of it, another metaphor that I'll give is we can think of it like the air traffic control tower in the brain. Right? So if there's a bunch of planes landing and a bunch of planes taking off, those planes might independently be ready to rock and roll and they're doing great. But without a central control tower that's regulating and managing and saying, okay, initiate here, wait, inhibit there, go time, pull back time, things can get chaotic, right? And so what happens with the brain, and I keep pointing here because executive functions exist in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And that's where the air traffic control tower kind of lives, right? So where we want to also understand is the amygdala, which is the part of the brain, which maybe you've talked about it with others, which is the emotional regulation part of our brain. They are highly related, but also separate. So when we're talking about what is executive functioning, and I say it's the ability to pause and plan, what I mean by that is the pause is so integral. And that's what I was seeing with a lot of kids that I was working with, that they were skipping right over the pause, and their frustration would lead into behaviors that weren't serving them, right? Their overwhelm, their fear, whatever was going on, their excitement, they weren't able to get into a place in which they were regulated and able to then execute. So the pause is then figuring out, okay, how can I help either co-regulate or offer up some strategies to self-regulate to get into a place in which they're ready to learn, right? If it's learning that we're talking about, maybe it's cleaning their room, maybe it's going out for lunch, whatever it is, right? Because we're talking about we're talking about functioning on day-to-day, not just in academics, which is another misnomer I think a lot of people have, that executive functioning is only about academics. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not, right? We're talking about the ability to function. So then that pause is the first part. And the second part, the plan, is going, okay, now what? This is what is, right? Whether or not I like it, this might be really boring and I don't want to do it. Okay, all right, I'm going to pause and I'm going to recognize that. And now what? What comes next? So that same process applied in a time of crisis is a really handy framework, right? When we start, and I work with adults and I work with teens, and now I work with, I have a team of 9 coaches that work with me. And we're seeing this increase, Lainey. I mean, it's not surprising, but we're seeing this increase in people freezing, right? So this kind of classic fight or flight, I'm seeing that, but I'm seeing that third one of freeze. And they're frustrated with their inability to be productive, right? And being sent these messages of it's time to be productive, right? So for a lot of teenagers with e-learning here in the United States, it's like, it's ridiculous to me because it's like, everything's just kind of, let's pretend nothing's changed. And all of the curriculum that was happening before is going to be thrown up again. And we're just going to assume that kids are going to adapt and be able to figure this out. And it's really, I'm saying from the inside, I'm watching, I'd say at least 3 times a week, I have kids that will break down, teens that are breaking down in tears and just feeling so lost and overwhelmed and stupid, right? Their words that they're saying to me. And it's really hard to see, right? And we'll go back to those basics of pause and plan, of going, I see that you're motivated. This is not something about motivation. So I just wanted to dispel that myth like right away, please, that when we're talking about an inability to function, it's not because you're lazy. It's not because your kid's lazy. It's because something is stuck that needs to help be unstuck, right? So if he or she is not executing on whatever it is, the math homework, it might be that he's not interested in the math homework, or he doesn't find the math homework relevant, right? Or he's really intimidated and afraid of failing, or overwhelmed because he doesn't know what to do. There's a lot of different paths where the behavior that we're observing, is non-engagement, right? The behavior is procrastination and putting it off, right? We want to recognize that behavior, but as a coach, I also want to understand what's leading there. And then again, this framework, I'm going to repeat it till I'm blue in the face, of pause and plan. Your question of why is executive functioning important right now? It's important anytime in our lives to figure out, okay, what am I doing to keep moving forward in a way that serves me? And if it's not serving me and it feels icky and it feels off, then I want to recognize what's going on so I can get myself back into a place where I feel more grounded.
Wow. Yeah. And that actually frames what parents are going through and their teens and children are going through as well, in a way that we can totally understand it. It's not about the behavior, it's about what's leading to the behavior. So, what would you say to parents who are telling their anxious children that there's nothing to worry about? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. So I've had an uptick in calls, which from a business standpoint, I guess is exciting, I guess. And no, it is, period. It's exciting because I think people are recognizing also a need in unusual times. Where are the helpers? Where are the support people? What kind of supports are we looking for? So part of the uptick in the calls, it sort of falls into 2 categories. One is, I've heard that you're the horse whisperer for anxious kids, Maggie. How can you help me? My kid, and at least this is from parents' perspective, was never anxious before, right? Or was able to manage his or her anxiety before, and now is really having trouble. And so I'm listening, going, I get it. Me too. Me too. I'm having a lot of trouble. This is really hard, right? That's kind of the first category is the emotional overwhelm. And then the other category, and we can see how these are related, are parents that are calling me saying, my kid's not doing the work he's supposed to be doing or she's supposed to be doing, right? He's always been on a track of performance, and now he's fallen off of that track, and he has all these missing assignments, and what's going on, and the productivity has tanked. Or adults will call me, because I work with both teens and adults, and say to me a whole lot of stuff about productivity, right? So then to address your question of what do we say to a person who's anxious, right? I'll tell you what not to say, because I think that's an easier one, right? And we'll talk about other things you can say. But one of the things we don't want to say is we don't want to say, it's fine, there's nothing to worry about, right? It's fine, there's nothing to worry about. Your partner, your child, your colleague comes to you and says, I'm really worried about this. And we say, it's all overblown, it'll be fine, whatever. Any kind of dismissive, right? I'm not really hearing you comment is our intention, I hope, is to calm. But I'll tell you that the impact, right? Impact versus intention. Our intention is to calm. The impact is to then either make the child more anxious because then they feel like they're not being heard, right? Or that their worries are in their own head and totally out of place, right? That's one of the things that it can say when we say, don't worry about this, it'll be fine, it'll blow over, there's nothing to worry about. And the other kind of detrimental path that it can take is that then they feel like they're not safe, that we don't know what we're talking about, right? They've then heard that there is something to worry about. They're expressing to us that they're concerned. And instead of me going, okay, and we're going to talk about what we can say, what we really don't want to say is this doesn't matter. It does matter. And it is real. And there are challenges, right? We're skipping over that pause part when we try to outplan, which is not even really a plan. It's just dismissive when we say there's nothing happening. There's no worries here.
Yeah, so true. So why don't you share with us a little bit about like what dismissing your kids' fear-based questions sounds like, so parents that are listening to this really get what you're saying, because we might be doing it and not realizing that we're actually dismissing our kids.
Exactly. No, and I think I'm so glad you brought this up because I work with loving, loving, loving parents, right? We're not talking about parents that wake up in the morning and say, I want to ruin my child's life. I want to make my child feel more worried and anxious at all, right? We're coming from a place of trying to help. And so what usually works for us in terms of calming and coping strategies is usually what we offer, i.e. impose on our kids, right? And so I see this in executive functioning all the time, that when things feel chaotic for somebody and they try to manage and tame that chaos through a strict schedule and order, then it'll drive them bananas if they offer up that to their child and their child doesn't want that, or their colleague or their partner or their coworker, right? That this works for me. If you would only just follow this path, it'll work for you too. It may be true, right? But it's not really getting to the crux of what we're talking about in terms of helping. So I have in front of me actually I write a blog and I keep a website, and one of the most popular blogs or articles that I've written in the last, I don't know, year maybe, has been, I called it Stop Telling Your Anxious Child That There's Nothing to Worry About, right? And I think that I kind of outlined some do's and don'ts. If it's okay, maybe I can say the two do. Okay. So what I'd written was do respond to their inquiries. So it's a child that comes up and says, I'm worried about COVID. Let's just pretend, since we're going to contextualize in reality right now, right? But I also want to pause and say it might not be that he or she is expressing it through the lens of COVID. And that's okay too. It might be, I'm really anxious about not being able to see my girlfriend, or not being able to get an A or go off to college, right? I have a senior that was hysterically crying. A senior in high school is the last year here in the United States, about what his college experience will look like. He doesn't know, right? He doesn't know. And so I had an option during that call, and I'll tell you, Lainey, every bone in my body, I had to zip it because what I wanted to say to him was, it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. You are going to be able to go to prom. Everything's going to get back to normal. Just you wait. And that's a whole bunch of BS. I don't know that. I can't make that promise to him. It's inauthentic for me to say that to him, right? I want to be able to cure and fix, and it's not my place, right? It's not my place as a coach. It's not my place as a friend. It's not my place as a parent, right? It is, however, my place to then, and this is where I say do respond to their inquiries by, number one, confirming that you've heard and understands their worries, okay? What I call compassionate listening, active listening. Number one, confirm that you've heard and understand their worries. And there are all kinds of techniques around this. One of my absolute favorite is simply saying what I think I heard you say, or did I hear you correctly? And to restate what they've just told me. I think a lot of parents are really afraid to do that because they think it'll sort of give credence or weight to the worry. And they'd rather just sort of brush past it, right? Or help around it. But we're not doing that when we're not giving space to that worry. He tells me he's worried and crying about being worried of what his future is going to look like. I then have an opportunity to say, I hear you. I hear you, right? You're worried that you're going to miss prom and you're upset about it, right? So that's number one. Number two, reassuring your children they are safe. Reassuring that your children that they are safe. And I put here by identifying and evaluating risks. That could be its own conversation for us, right? And that's where it kind of gets into my background in international relations and when we look at media and risk. But essentially what I'm saying here is it's not our place to then, our child comes to us with his worry, to then have our own anxieties show up and lay those at his or her feet. Not really fair. I don't care if they're 5 or 25, right? Here's where I can't promise my children or myself, because I really want to, that I'm going to be on a plane in another 6 months. I desperately want somebody to tell me that, but I also sort of resent, well, I'll tell you, my husband did say that recently when I was nervous, and he's like, Maggie, we're going to be on a plane by December. And I said to him, you can't promise me that. You don't know that, you know? And I'd say the same thing about anything that we're offering up. No, I cannot assure my children that I will keep them safe from a disease, but what I can assure them is that it's my job to keep them safe, and I take that job very seriously. For my coaching clients, I can't assure them that the world is going to get back to normal, but I can assure them that I'm going to be with them every Tuesday at 11:30. Right? That they can count on me for that regularity and that routine, right? And that's really grounding to have somebody saying, okay, let's evaluate these risks, right? Let's look at what this looks like. And we're going to go into that, I hope. And then also through the lens of you're safe. I've got this. I'm here with you, right? I can't control it. I want to, but I can control that I'm here and I'm showing up and I'm here with you.
Well, why don't you take a moment and just get deeper into that? Because I know you're dying to.
So here's what I had written, and I put some thought into this, right? Of thinking of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they're 5. They're not going to be 25, right? But here's 5 things, and I'll make this PDF available to our community if that's something they'd be interested in. We can put it in notes or whatever, but I'm happy to share this. It's not enlightening stuff, but I think there's some concrete. I'm a person who's pretty concrete. I like some things that I can say. So let's go through them, right? What you said to me originally of what not to say, we know that saying it'll be fine never calms an anxious child, right? So it'll be fine. Let's just kind of erase that. Let's get rid of it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Not helpful. Here's what we could say instead. Here's something that I can offer up. So number 1, what do you feel nervous about? So what do you feel nervous about? Notice I'm not asking, why do you feel nervous? Right? A child or an adult or a colleague, right, might not be able to identify why. And they might be in that amygdala state in which they're not able to process all of what's going on. So just standing there and saying to them, okay, I recognize that you're nervous. What's Tell me more. What are you feeling nervous about? Okay. That's number one. Number two, what have you been hearing? What have you been watching? So before assuming we're on the same page, is what I wrote, identify what your child understands and how they perceive the issue, right? That's a really, really big one with COVID. Really big one. I'm seeing that play out in my own family, right? Is that I assume we're hearing the same things and we're playing on the same playing field. And we don't know that. And by asking the question, what have you been hearing? What are your friends saying? What have you been watching? Right? It gives them a chance to also process out loud with me part of their fears, usually, right? This is what others are saying, or this is what I've heard, or the news keeps repeating this. And my role there is to zip it, even if every fiber in my body is like, no, that's not true, which it may or may not be true, right? I don't have a crystal ball, right? But what I'm doing there is I'm actively listening. Okay, so when you heard this, X, right? So you've been watching this repeated over and over, right? So that's number two. What have you been hearing and watching? Number three, biggie, biggie, biggie. Where have you been hearing these things? Where have you been hearing these things, right? Is your child gathering their information from friends, YouTube, a sibling? If it's from the internet, here's a big one. How often are they checking the news? Okay. And if it's a lot, and what we see with children with executive functioning issues, particularly with ADHD, is that we'll start to see them doing things repetitively, right? They'll start to watch the news a lot. And so my suggestion, and this is very concrete, is to consider having a time in your day, in your family's day, if that's possible, in which you engage with the media. Okay, so something I learned a long time ago. So either together or separately, that's going to depend on what you're doing. I mean, from a media literacy standpoint, you want to be watching and digesting hard stuff together. I know that, right? But I know that's not always realistic. I know that that's not always realistic. So if everybody's on their iPad or on their screen or whatever, right? That you do have some time to think about, which is what really we're talking about. The best opportunity for a parent is when a child comes to us or whoever comes to us and says, I'm really worried about X, Y, or Z. What an opportunity. And what a missed opportunity if we say there's nothing to worry about, right? What an opportunity when they say there's something to worry about, because then they're feeling something and we can hear them out. So again, to kind of go back to this limited screen exposure, what we're doing there is we're not laying down rules of stop watching television. It's at what point in the day do we want to expose ourselves to information about COVID in this in particular, right? And let's think of a plan. And if you're tempted to continually look for more information, then you really want to go back into that pause part and pause and plan about this, right? Because there's something that is feeding that and where it's coming from to constantly be checking for more information. And we want to see if it's serving us. If the answer is no, it's not serving us, then we want to plan around what could serve us better. And what research shows is that the less exposure we have to television, the less our minds launch into fear-based assumptions. 100%, I don't know, nothing's 100%, but the research on this is very definitive. And we've been looking at this since television first came on board in the 1950s and 60s. Researchers have been looking at this. Okay, so that's not to say don't inform yourself. That's not to say don't do that. If you're a person who really likes watching the news and feels like or your child is somebody, you may agree with it or not. But instead of saying, stop watching the news, I don't believe in that, this is all a spin of lies, that may not serve that other person. We're not here. We got to go back to the basics of what we were just saying, right? We can help create a schedule around when and how. So that's my number 4, which is, where are you hearing these things is what's your sources, right? We want to create a schedule. And then my number 4 is, let's look into this together. Okay. So child comes and says, I'm really afraid of, I'm going to die or you're going to die or, whatever it is they're saying, I'm afraid of X. let's look to this together. So my suggestion that I said was, it's okay as parents to admit we don't have all the answers, right? It's okay. It's okay. We don't have to news source our child's news sources, right? We're slapping on a lens that may or may not be correct. I don't know. But saying, let's look at this together. What I said is considering a list of maybe 2 or 3 reliable resources, particularly important for kids or for teens that we're questioning because we've already asked them, where are you getting this information? And if it's from news sources or people that we're not so sure about, right? We don't want to necessarily say that, but we can say, okay, I hear that you're hearing it from this, this, and this. What are other sources we can look at? And limiting it to those for a little bit. And then, because otherwise it's so overwhelming, Lainey. It can be information from anywhere and everywhere. And that can be overwhelming. Okay, so number 5, the very last one, can't repeat this more. You're safe. The words, you're safe. And we sometimes trip over ourselves to explain the how, when those words with a really pregnant pause afterwards can be incredibly powerful, right? I'm worried, you're safe, right? I'm here with you. And we want to reassure our kids of the measures we're taking to ensure that we're safe and that we're taking the job of keeping them safe seriously as well.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like approaching executive functioning is very similar to the attachment theory of creating a secure attachment, right? Because secure attachments, it's about safety, being seen or heard, secure, and soothed. So it's all of those things. So we're really talking about the relationship as the caretaker, right?
Mm.
What can we do? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead and comment.
I'm going to say, I think that there are a lot of different folks in the executive functioning space. So I should probably clarify that my lens is one of a world schooler, right? And so I could not agree more with you. And what I found success in my own coaching practice is exactly from what you're saying. Connection first, connection first. And if there's not a connection first, then it's very difficult for us to start to unravel some of the other pieces that are stuck. And that is not always the norm for all of us in the field. So I should clarify that yes, it can be attachment parenting, as you're saying, or that philosophy, but not always, not necessarily.
But in terms of your lens,
Right.
and speaking to our community, we're really talking about that connection or that relationship, right? Because we are the caretakers. I mean, we are when we're out in the world with our families, and that puts us in sort of a vacuum in terms of the greater scope of society. This is not how society and families usually function. But now we've got a lot more people that are in this situation, and maybe they're part-time world schoolers and they didn't really have this as their foundation before. What kind of not advice, but what kind of how can you reassure those folks that are struggling to have that connection and to say the right things without giving them stress right now? Because I've said all 5 of those things, I've done it wrong,
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I don't think any of us are getting it right. Right? I mean, the big joke, and you know this about our family, the big joke is people will say, okay, Maggie's a yoga and meditation teacher and an executive functioning coach. And they think that when they meet my kids, they're going to be well-organized Buddha Zen masters. Right? And then they meet my family and then they see real life. And, I always laugh that during our first intake session, I used to go into the homes of clients. Now, I've transitioned online to Zoom, and I'm really lucky that I've done that earlier, right? So it's been pretty seamless to meet clients that way. What I know in terms of connection is that the medium is not the message, right? That you can connect with people and have deep, meaningful connections on a screen and have superficial and nonsense connections in a room, right? And vice versa. And but I think this idea of, not necessarily always getting it right, not necessarily saying the wrong thing or the right thing. But I was saying that when I used to go to the homes of my clients, people would be so nervous because they knew the EF coach was coming. And so they would scrub their floors, like legit, be ready 5 minutes in advance because they thought that I was judging and they thought that I was going to walk in. I think this is what I suspect. And they thought kind of, here's the person who's going to help me manage my time, be organized, get it under control. And so if I present an environment that looks controlled, I don't know, they're going to win brownie points. I don't know. But I think that's kind of the crux when it's like, how do we do this? Although I offered up some concrete language about it, it doesn't mean that we're getting it wrong if we screw up some of the language, right? So have I told my kids before, don't worry about it? Of course I have. Of course I have. Part of it is because maybe in that moment, either I was afraid, I didn't know what to say, or I was busy, or I didn't want to deal with it, right? But the other opportunity there is this huge one, which is repair, right? So we get to then go to our kid or to our colleague or to our partner 5 minutes, 5 days, I don't know, 5 years later and say, you told me that you were really worried and I dropped the ball. And I've been thinking about that. And when you were trying to explain to me, let's revisit that or whatever we can talk about, what I heard you say then was this. And I answered this. And I don't think I did a very good job there because what I really wanted to do is hear what you were worried about. And the kid or the adult might turn to you and be like, what? I've forgotten about that long ago. They might, or they might really appreciate, oh gosh, okay, they're hearing me, right? We don't always have to get it right. The thing about the e-learning, Lainey, that's fascinating to me and is my own journey that I have not yet solved is this idea of structure in one's day, right? One of the things that I found really useful and I can offer up to our community is an idea of replacing structure with rhythm. And I've been saying to clients, what's the rhythm of your heart has a certain rhythm. And when you're exercising, it has a different rhythm. And when you're meditating, it has a different rhythm, right? It's okay to have fluctuations in a rhythm, right? That's natural and normal. What's not natural and normal is pretending that it's going to be always the same. That's flatlining, then we're dead, right? We want to have emotions. We want to have variation. What's disruptive is having so much variation that there's no anchor points and there's no grounding, right? So grounding and anchor points and rhythm is going to look different for everybody. And adapting to what this looks like for my own family, as I said, I'm really grieving. And I've come to this point a month in or whatever we are. I'm really grieving the lack of adventure. It's really hard for me. The newness and the spontaneity is part of my rhythm, was, right? And not having the spontaneity is so hard for me. We live next to a park and my husband said, well, let's go around the park. And I snapped at him. I was like, if I have to walk around the same park over and over for the rest of my life, I'm going to lose it. Right. And I recognize the needs for getting outside and getting exercise. I see all of that. But then again, I had to come back into this place of myself of pause and plan. I got to pause. Crap, I'm really grieving the lack of spontaneity in my rhythm. This is hard for me. Whereas for somebody else, it might be that they're really grieving the loss of structure in their day. And that's okay too, right? So I don't know how to wrap it up with a bow. I don't know the advice. I know that part of the advice is listening to ourselves and listening to the other person. And I do think, as an EF coach, I go back into this language of what I know, which is let's look at what's happening with that control tower, right? So if the control tower is not even operational, then okay, then it's not operational for this moment or today or whatever. But if that's not serving us for it to not be operational, then let's get into a place in which our disengagement, this is what I'm seeing a lot with kids, right? And this is the example I'll give that I think is a really good one, not because I came up with it, but because I think it helps, which is Netflix, okay? So, or television or, entertainment. We all know the difference between looking at, a Netflix binge and then afterwards going, oh, that felt so good, right? Like I needed those hours or that show to just disengage. God, that felt so good. We kind of wake up from it and we're like, that's exactly what I needed. Versus avoiding something else and procrastinating and escaping into, right, an entertainment. And then we wake up from that, whatever, X amount of hours later, and we go, that doesn't feel good at all, right? I've been putting off and running away from other things that would better serve me and escaping those things in order to do this instead, right? Same activity. So we look at a functionality or productivity, same productivity levels. Both people in that scenario watch Netflix for 6 hours. One person came out of it served and grounded. The other person came out of it feeling worse and feeling less grounded.
So what do you do if you recognize you come out of it and it didn't serve you? What do you do?
Pause and plan. What do? You recognize it, and we don't want to usually recognize. I mean, we recognize that we feel icky. That's pretty easy to recognize. What a lot of people do, they feel really guilty, right? So it goes into a guilt. And then, like I was saying earlier, I've had all these calls. I'm a loser. I'm so stupid, right? These calls of people of, I can't get my S together. I just can't do this, Maggie. Other people are being productive and they're learning these new languages and skills. I can't do anything, right? The thing about it, what do you do to answer your question? You wake up from that and you say, man, this feels icky. I'm going to sit with that. This feels icky. Okay. I'm not going to blame myself about it or try to then, do 5 things that are productive in order to cover up what I just did. That's not how this works. Right. In terms of then building the neural pathways, which is what we talk about in executive functioning, building those neural pathways, we know that habits form neural pathways. So the more we repeat an action, the more that becomes our default pathway. So if we feel overwhelmed by something, doing our taxes, right? It's tax season in the United States or whatever, they've extended it. Taxes, it's a non-preferred task for me. I don't love doing my taxes, right? And I can put them off and justify it in my own head. But there comes a point in which I say that task, whatever it is, it would serve me. It would feel like an accomplishment for me to be able to finish that, right? So escaping that over and over is eventually going to catch up with me. And we see this with teenagers too. They escape and they put off and they procrastinate. And I'll say to them, we know it's not going to magically go away. It doesn't even go away that night when they go to sleep. They're still worried about it, right? But it's more nebulous rather than being concrete, that they're like, now I have these things. It creates more anxiety for them because they're not quite sure what's due anymore and how far into the rabbit hole they've fallen. And so that's scarier. It seems like it'll be scarier for them to list out with me what needs to get done and when. But once we do that, and I'm not denying that it's scary, but once we go through that vulnerable process, then it's concrete, then it's actionable, then we can do something about it. Otherwise, we're not in the plan stage. and we've skipped right over the pause stage. We're just in the guilt and shame stage. Not helpful.
No, it's not helpful, but I can say from so many conversations that I've had with so many families, teens, and children, feeling uncomfortable is not something that they have a lot of experience doing. The West, us in the Western world, we do everything we can to avoid feeling uncomfortable. So sitting with being uncomfortable might be a really new experience for many people.
Totally. And what we'll see about discomfort, and I'm so glad you mentioned the word uncomfortable, uncomfortable leads to growth, right? This is what I'll talk about all the time. If we're not uncomfortable, we're not growing, right? And I don't want to be uncomfortable, right? I'd rather be comfortable, right? But I also, here's this fixed mindset, this kind of Carol Dweck fixed mindset, growth mindset of where I then am uncomfortable is where I'm growing. Now that doesn't mean I seek out discomfort. No, I'm not a masochist, right? But it does mean that if there's a challenge to me, legit, if something is really hard for me, if it's hard for me to list out these missing assignments because it feels really hard, I can honor that and work through it. Because if I don't, again, it's a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for our kids to give them what I would call, right, home responsibilities, chores. And the research shows this, that children that have tasks feel like an operative member of the group, right? It's a message in real life, not just in words of, we need you. You're a viable member of this team. What you do in the house counts and matters, right? And they feel it because if they didn't feed the cat doesn't get fed. If they didn't sweep the living room, the living room is full of junk, whatever, right? And so it's not just here's the formula to create a healthy family and an operational and flawless family. That's not what we're doing, right? But it is this same kind of idea of, I don't want to feed the cat. I know, I hear you. You don't want to feed the cat. Maybe it's even uncomfortable because you're more comfortable with your book on the couch. I get it. But the cat does need to be fed. So what are we going to do? Because if I rob you of that opportunity and I continually problem solve for you, Lainey, I cannot tell you how often I see this for homework, right? What I call it is we're lending the child our prefrontal cortex, right? Kids lots of times have no idea when their doctor's appointments or dentist appointments or tennis lessons are happening. Why? Because mom's keeping it all on her calendar. And then she'll family share through technology, beautiful thing. But at no point does the kid have to then learn to keep a calendar. So how can we be surprised that he reaches 15, 18, 20 and is going, I don't know how to manage my own calendar. I've never had practice at it. I've never had to. So that skill's never built, right? So of course it's going to be uncomfortable. And I'll tell you, it's increasingly uncomfortable the more we haven't practiced and we've been used to doing things one way. But that's okay. That's okay. It's uncomfortable, yes, but that doesn't mean it's not time to start to work through it, because discomfort leads to growth, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And do you have any suggestions for families so they could practice self-care? Any techniques or any, briefly?
I'm working on it. I think, right, as a yoga instructor, I think that there's kind of two ways to practice self-care. I think mind and body. I really do. I think that there's ways, and we're talking about anxiety today, there's coping and calming strategies that have to do with cognitive strategies, and then there's there's body strategies. And you can kind of pick and choose. So kind of to throw out one from each. Oh, you're putting me on the spot. Let's see. In terms of a grounding strategy that I find from the body, right, is this 5-4-3-2-1. And so to identify, right, you've probably seen this, identify things that you smell, see, taste, hear. What am I missing? Smell, taste, see, hear. And then there's the fifth sense, which I can't think of right now. But I'll do this with kids, that I'll say, name 5 things you see, right? Oh, did I see sight? Hello, see. See 5 things that you see. right? And so they'll say table, chair, lamp, whatever, right? And then I'll go into 4 things you hear, and I'm already getting still. And 4 things, okay, I hear the humming of the whatever, I hear this, I hear that. It might take them a little while, but what we're doing there is we're co-regulating. And what we're doing there is we're coming down into a place of where we are right now through the senses. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What am I tasting? And that actually can get really subtle, right? You can start to taste acidity or sweetness, but you're not noticing that unless you're really tuning in and dropping in, right? So that's something with the body. Something for the mind that helps us with anxiety is we can start to think of, instead of worst case scenarios, what is scenarios, right? Instead of what if questions, what is questions, right? So we'll go back into homework and e-learning, right? What if I fail this test? What if I'm not prepared? Okay, what is happening? I'm missing 4 assignments, or I don't know where to start in studying for this. All of a sudden, we flipped it and it's an actionable plan. All of a sudden, we're in more control, right? It's not that we're constantly seeking to dominate and control everything. It's that when we start to get and spin into our own head, it feels so scary, understandably, that we're off to the races. I'll say that, the train has left the station. The train is now 5 stations ahead of us, or is parked 5 stations behind us. And I'm seeing that a lot actually with kids with EF challenges, that we've come a long way in our coaching. And this is throwing a real wrench into the monkey bars, or whatever the expression is, right? In that they're so afraid of repeating those old behavioral patterns, right? And there again, what we were talking about earlier, I could say to them, no, you won't, you'll be fine. But it's exactly the same thing of what we were talking about when somebody talks about their fears. I don't want to say, no, you won't, you'll be fine. I want to really hear what they're saying. And then I want to work with not the what if, but the what is. But wait a minute, are you the same person today that you were 6 months ago or 2 years ago? What's different? Help me write this out. Help me understand what's different. What tools and strategies are you using and have learned that makes it different?
And finally, I guess my last question is, when is it time for families to consider seeking outside help if anxiety or executive functioning issues or stress no longer is manageable?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I'll say that there are 3 kind of mitigating factors when I'll talk with families with exploratory calls. And time, money, energy. Those are limited resources, okay? Limited resources, and I get it. And right now, time is limited and not limited. It's hard to tell, depends who you're talking to, right? But money and focus, if you already have a lot of things going on, and either it's time to drop some of the energy that you're putting elsewhere and refocus it on, either professional EF coaching or professional psychological help, and or to evaluate if you or your child can take on more, right? So that's a big deal. And then that last one, money, I understand too. I very much get that. My services aren't free. I do charge for my services. And if somebody, I would never want it to be an impediment to a family to seek out professional guidance because of money. But I also am realistic in understanding those 3 factors can be roadblocks, right? So what we want to then get real with ourselves is saying, at what am I willing to put into this, right? Like, at what point do I say, I need help, or my family needs help? We need some support. There's no shame in that. My goodness, we need some help, right? And then saying, okay, I don't have all the answers, and that's a good thing. That's okay. And then we can even put some goals around it, right? To where's my North Star for this, right? Where do I hope to be? What would it look like if I invested the time and the energy and the money? what am I hoping to gain from that? That's different than setting up expectations just to be clear about how fast this should go and how it should look. That's different. But then figuring out, okay, I could use some guidance and I could use some support is a big deal, a big, big deal. You know, one thing I will say that's really important is that we don't want to say, you know, this is the point at which I'll know I'm cured. Our kids and our families are not broken toys that need fixing and mending. That's not what help and support looks like. Nobody's broken, right? It's what are the patterns that we're engaging in that serve us? And again, it's that message, that question, that inquiry of if it's not serving us, then I want to get on track. I want to see what can be uncovered and get unstuck so that it is.
And that's powerful. And I just love how you break things down. I'm so certain that this will serve so many people in our community. And Maggie, I'm so incredibly grateful that you've taken an hour out of your life to share your knowledge and share this information with our World Schoolers communities. Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure. And we're all working our way through this. It's really hard. Nobody's health or mental health has a point of perfection. There's no, you know, when I get here, everything will be settled. When I learn these tricks, you know, and strategies, then I'll be full. You know, that's not how it works. It's this constant, you know, watering of the garden to then we look around and go, this feels pretty settled. This feels pretty good. It's a hard thing to do in these times, as I know we know, Lainey, it's hard. And that's okay that we're all recognizing that this is really unusual, right? We're doing the best we can. And that's, you know, certainly from my perspective, what I have to kind of keep reminding myself. I'm doing the best I can. I really am. Some days it's better than others. And I want to also say that to our community, you know, we're trying, and that counts for something.
Oh, yeah. And I just love the idea that we're all works in progress. So, yeah. Thank you. So, Maggie, I'm going to ask you to put your information in this, the video thread or the video comments, and then I'm going to post this on our mental health thread. So, thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you very, very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lainey. Take care.
You too. Bye.